First thing I did when making this new aquarium was paint the back. It usually takes about 5 to 6 coats to get everything fully covered. I don't use anything fancy for this. All I ever do is make sure the brush strokes are all going in the same direction. Then I get the dimensions for the internal sump and start measuring it out on the expanded PVC board. After measuring, I begin cutting out the first piece of the filter. It usually takes about 2 to 3 passes, depending on the pressure, until the piece is completely removed. Next, I begin cutting out the sump compartments. I do want these to be about an inch shorter than the rest of the filter pieces for proper water flow. Lastly, I measure and cut out the final piece for the internal filter so that everything can be kept separate from the main body of the aquarium. Next, I begin on the assembly. Always make sure to use 100% silicone for this step, otherwise the chemicals will harm any future livestock that you decide to add. When building the compartments on this, I wanted to make sure I had enough room for a heater, mechanical filtration, as well as the pump. After assembly and the silicone curing, I drilled a hole for the pump, added silicone onto the sump compartments, and press fit the filter into the aquarium. After press fitting, I added silicone to all of the edges and smoothed it away with my finger to create a watertight seal. I then did a test fill to ensure everything had gone to plan. After assembling the pump and adding it to the aquarium to make sure everything had gone to plan, I realized that I had a problem. There was a leak, slow but steady, coming from the edge of the aquarium. I set this one aside so I could fix it later and painted the back of a 5-gallon aquarium. After painting, I then measured and cut out all of the pieces for a new sump. Though this filter will be a little bit more complicated, it does follow the same basic idea. Using the plastic screen to keep large debris out of the sponge, and the spun as mechanical filtration to keep finer debris out of the biological media. It will still be 3 compartments, though the first one will be split so it can house both the mechanical and biological filtration. The assembly went the same except for the small area in the first compartment for the filter sponge. I then added silicone into all of the areas I wouldn't be able to see once I had it press fit into the side of the aquarium. This time, I added tape into the visible areas of the aquarium for the cleanest bead I could achieve when waterproofing. After applying the silicone and smoothing it out, I then removed the tape before it had time to cure. Once that was finished, I then added in the base layer of nutrients to the aquarium. This was about 15 root tabs that I had broken down. I then capped off all of the fertilizing nutrients with a coarse white sand. I also add in some regular size aquarium gravel to prevent compaction for the roots, as well as creating more height in the background. Capping it all off with more white sand for a uniform look. For hardscape, I used 2 pieces of dragonstone, adjusting them slightly to make sure all of the lines were going in the same direction. I also added in spiderwood to try to build some height. This first one I'm putting in there, I wanted it to be the focal point of the aquarium, so it did take me quite a while to figure out where I wanted it. After placing the focal point, the other 2 were quite a bit easier. All I had to do was make sure they looked natural with what I already had. Once I was happy with the design, I added paper towel into places where the rock met the wood, then soaking it with liquid superglue to create a concrete-like bond. Then, before the glue dries, I add dirt on top of it to help it blend in. With the hardscape finished, I added another scoop of aquarium gravel into the background to help build more height. I pressed it into the gaps in the stones to prevent air pockets, then capped it off with more white sand. With the background complete, I then flattened out all of the sand in the foreground and began working on the details. For these, I used more of the regular aquarium gravel as a scatter stone and covered everything in a finer grain, dark aquarium sand to prevent too much contrast. I then begin planting, starting with the epiphytes. I use a cyanoacrylate superglue gel for this process because once it hits water, it becomes inert, therefore rendering it safe for all future plants and livestock. The first plant that I'm adding in is Anubias non-petite. This is a small, slow-growing epiphyte plant that will create a nice bushy dark green effect around the aquarium. And behind that, a couple pieces of Anubias congentus mini. For the first layer of the background, I added another slow-growing plant named Cryptocorn lutea. I didn't want to cover up all of the detail stones I added in the foreground, so I put in a few sprigs of Hynanthium tenuis. This plant does send out runners, but everything stays very low to the ground, making it a perfect choice for the foreground and nano aquariums. After completing the foreground, I then moved on to the background, starting with a new plant to me named Blixa japonica. Lastly, I added in the main background plant, Rotala rotundifolia. I plant these stem plants in bunches of 1 to 3, so the roots always have somewhere to go. As a fast-growing stem plant, the Rotala will help absorb excess nutrients in the aquarium as well. Once the planting was completed, I slowly filled the aquarium, making sure not to disturb the gravel on the bottom. After filling, I plugged in the light so I could enjoy the hard work. Though the work was not quite over yet. 24 hours later, the tannins had begun to set in, so I did a 50% water change. When setting up a new aquarium, I do try to mess with it as little as possible so it can achieve equilibrium on its own. And there we have it. 24 hours after the water change, the water is cleared up, though it does still have a slight brown tinge to it from the wood. 2 days after that, I did another 50% water change on it. Less so for clarity purposes, and more so I could get it moved into its new home. And there we have it. 1 week in, and it's progressing normally. The stem plants are starting to grow in, there's some expected melt on the others, but everything is looking quite beautiful. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see everybody in the next one. After about 2 years, the aquarium has definitely started to change and also come into shape. Some of the main changes are pretty small. I've been using it as a bit of a plant storage tank for the last few months to keep some Java ferns growing, as well as try to get some boost growing on the rocks. Unfortunately, those didn't end up working. Getting this aquarium back into shape shouldn't be too hard though. First step is just taking out of the free-floating Java ferns and then trimming down the stem plants in the back to get those back into shape. Then I sort out all of the stems of the Rotala by size, and I get them replanted into the aquarium to keep the density of the background plants. And finally, I add in a couple of extra pieces of Anubias that I had laying around, not because it needed it, but just because I wanted them to be in somewhere that they would grow and be happy. After removing the rocks that were out of place, I do a little stir up on the substrate to try to clean that up, clean out this filter sponge, and then get it refilled up with some water. 35 days later, and things have actually settled really well again. In older aquariums, this is not all that uncommon because things have just had time to mature, settle in, and make it so smaller disturbances don't have as big of an effect. The stem plants have grown back in, needing trimming again. This is something that does happen right about once a month and something that I really enjoy doing. Cutting all the longer growing stems so that they'll have 2 new nodes growing into place after that is a really rewarding way to watch the plant density increase in your aquarium. Do another small water change for it, add some more fertilizers in, get it filled back up, and it's ready to go for another month. At day 660, you can really see the difference that all the maintenance has made. There are a couple of stem plants that are sticking up a little bit too high. I get those trimmed back and replanted, but other than that, there's not much that needs to be done anymore. The different Anubiases have started growing in just ridiculously dense, almost covering up the entire rock, as well as the Java Fern Petite looks fantastic where it is. The Cryptocorns have even started to thrive. The only problem that there is a little bit of green spot algae on the Anubias nonachingensis, but I'm not too worried about it. That's something that'll go away in time, and this aquarium looks absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, it's down to 1 inhabitant, being the lonely female celestial pearl danio. We'll be getting more soon, adding them in there, and she should be happy having friends back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see everybody in the next one.